Morning, delighted to welcome the former Liverpool and Republic of Ireland international defender Mark Lawrenson to the show. Morning, Lauro, how are things?
All good, apart from a heating failure in the house, which is why I've got my cap on. But
right,
other than that, we're all good.
Good Peaky Blinders hat, I like it. Yeah, you're pulling it off there,
Thank
Mark.
you.
I have to say, fair play to you.
I borrowed it off my dad who passed away. So
lovely,
Nice
lovely,
hat.
nice story to it as well. We'll keep an eye on this, Andy Murray game. We'll update the listeners and viewers as things go. 6-3 Murray currently in this tiebreak. We do want to talk Liverpool though, Lauro, because I mean the result of the weekend was disappointing again, but more so the performance against Brighton. 3-0 defeat.
Yeah.
I think Klopp described it as the low point of his own Liverpool tenure. Would you go along with that?
Well, I think he wasn't even stronger, which was ever. I think he said. I thought he said that the worst result ever in performance from a team, and we know they've been struggling. And the problem is, we know what the problem is, which is obviously midfield, and that's affected everything that Liverpool do. Because if you think about it, they're very attacking wise from the back with the two full-backs. But there's no protection in midfield at the moment. There's no creativity, so you can have who you want up front, and they just aren't creating any chances. And they're in a rut. And obviously, the problem is tonight they go to Wolves, which will be tight because of the way that Wolves are playing under Lopetegui. And I wouldn't mind betting they might even go out of the competition, which I don't think, in Klopp's mind, will be the end of the world. But then, really, you're talking about having to at the very least beat Champions League, and that's around the corner. Real Madrid at home in a couple of weeks, I think.
It's a realistic possibility, Mark. I mean, you're looking at the table here. They've already lost 6 times in the Premier League. They were only beaten 4 times in 63 games across all competitions last season. I mean, 10 points adrift of the top 4 as well. Is that a realistic possibility that they might not get that top 4? Because I mean, the way City and Arsenal, United and Newcastle are playing, it's a tough 4 to break into.
Absolutely, and I mean Van Dijk missing as well, but he wasn't playing particularly well either. Yeah, yes, most definitely, and we all know, as I said to you before, the problem is that lacking in midfield players. I don't think Jordan Henderson made a tackle. Apparently, somebody said at the weekend at Brighton. So it is a possibility. I mean, Klopp's been through this before, but he's looking at the players that he's got, and whichever way he changes them around at the moment, they're just not at it. I mean, they could easily have gone out against Wolves in the first game in the FA Cup because of the lack of VAR at that particular moment late on in the game. The kids are what they are, the kids, and they're not ready for it. And, he's also a bit reluctant to chuck them in at the moment because the team's suffering, and therefore they would suffer. And you bring kids in when the team's going well, just the odd 1 or 2 maybe. And they're just in a little bit of a mess. And of course, everybody go and buy some players, go and do this and go and do that. But that's not the way that they operate at Liverpool. And we know they took Gakpo, and I think the reason they took him because they do believe that it was only going to get better and his fee was going to go up. And I think his time was now. So you understand that. But it's no good having these 5 or 6 outstanding forward players and not really supplying them with any chances. And of course, they all of a sudden are thinking, well, we're not going to get the ball. What we're doing, so yeah, it is a bit of a mess at the moment. But look, the best thing about the football club is the manager, and he will sort it. But it might just be one of those seasons where they miss out on everything, I'm afraid.
In relation to that point, Mark, about them that's not the way they do things at Liverpool. The midfield area specifically, like you look at Thiago, and beyond that, you have ageing players, leggy players, young players who maybe not up to it, particularly in the midfield area. That's not the way they do things at Liverpool, is a very fair comment. Is it about time now, probably a lot of Liverpools would say, that maybe they just need to change their ways, particularly in relation to that area of the pitch?
Well, yeah, good question. But I think the thing is that maybe as well, I mean, the owners will be aware of it. And the problem probably is that the players that they want, aren't available, or if they are, it's absolutely mad money. And really, apart from the purchase of Alisson and Van Dijk, they've not generally paid more than 30-40 million generally was what they paid for players if you look at them and made them all better. Certainly there's a whole host of players on that list, but it's one of those, isn't it? They took the lad on loan from Italy who's basically not played. I think, has he gone back now? I think he got injured. So I don't. it's one of those. I just they're not the kind of club under Klopp that just goes right. You know what? Whatever, we'll just have to go and buy X, Y, Z. That's not the way that they operate.
Should he, in that case, if they're not going to bring somebody in, like sticking with the system as it is, does he need to be more adaptable in that? Like if they're not bringing a player in, it's not working for them in midfield. Like you see the way teams are playing through them so easily. Does he need to change it up a bit, or is it just too un-Klopp like?
I think it's a little bit of both. When you say change it up a little bit, I mean, basically, who else does he bring in? I mean, Oxlade-Chamberlain is playing at the moment, and I think most people would have looked at the Ox at the start of the season and thought, well, this will be his last year at Liverpool, and maybe even he might have gone in this transfer window because I'm afraid he's just off it. Kate has never really done it. He's one of the few Klopp signings that's not really done it. We've seen it in little bits and pieces where you think, wow, what a player, but he just disappears in games. And the kids, Elliot, etc., Carvalho, it's too early for them. It's too early for them to be playing on a regular basis, and you can actually destroy young players by consistently playing them. And the idea with young players is just to kind of, they can dip in and dip out. Curtis Jones, too many touches, really. When he's got the opportunity to play, he's not really. I mean, he came on, obviously, with that goal against Arsenal in the FA Cup, however, 2 or 3 years ago. And in all honesty, he's not kicked on. So it's a difficult one because what do you do? Do you put a defensive-minded player in? I mean, Fabinho's, we went away at the World Cup and he's looked ordinary. And generally, Fabinho's a 7 or 8 out of 10 every time he plays. He sits in front of the back two and does whatever he needs to do. But he's just not at it as well at the moment. And I think a little bit you can go back to last season, and I think this is a relevant argument, which is they played in every single game possible, didn't they? So they got to 3 cup competition finals and obviously played all the games in the league, and they didn't have too much of a pre-season, and it was probably too early. And I know it's quite, people say, oh yeah, but it's the turn of the year now and everything. But if you look at them, generally, nearly all of them, they just all look leggy. And it's a really, really difficult one for the manager to cope with. And like anything, when you look like that, you kind of think, oh, we can give them a bit of rest, etc. But look, they're playing every 3 days at the moment, aren't they? Yeah, that's like everybody.
Yeah, fair point, Mark. I mean, the fatigue is certainly something that was picked up on and mentioned by Jordan Henderson and Jurgen Klopp after the match at the weekend. Just a brief departure to mention that Andy Murray is through to the second round of the Australian Open. He is
marvellous.
Beaten. Yeah, great result for Andy Murray.
Many years ago, I was on a plane from Barcelona back to England, and I sat next to him, and he was only be about 16 or 17. And he used to do. I was sat in my seat, and then I saw this lad come down with all these rackets and everything. And I'm typical. I sat there and I said, "Oh, so you're a tennis player?" And he looked at me thinking, "You moron." But he's a really nice fella. And if you think about what him and Jamie have been through in their life, I mean, Dunblane. So and I always thought maybe about 18 months ago, well, that's probably the end of Andy Murray with his hip injuries, etc. And he's a fighter, isn't he? He really seriously is a fighter. Maybe he could play for Liverpool tonight against Wolves.
Was there a bit of game, recognised game, Mark? Did he know you were?
No, absolutely no idea. He just thought of this old buffer.
Did you give him the CV?
Get the Wikipedia out, no?
No. Didn't bother. No. In fact, to be fair, it was that long ago. I don't think Wikipedia was out.
Probably, that's a fair point. Yeah, but it's one of those things. He's quite impressive. I mean, physically, Murray. The fact that he's come through a 5-setter, especially against the 13th seed. Yeah. So it was 3-6, 3-6, 6-4, 7-6, 6-7. So Murray winning that final set tiebreak 10-6. So brilliant win for him on the Rod Laver Arena. We'll chat to Catherine Murphy a bit later in the show as well about that performance. Mark, did want to touch on when you're talking about the Liverpool tactics and formation. Like, I'm just reading here some of Klopp's comments from his press conference yesterday. He's saying ahead of this replay in the FA Cup tonight against Wolves, he has 2 senior strikers available. You'd imagine that's Salah and Gakpo. Nuñez is likely to be an injury risk, but I mean that might inadvertently make sure that he moves from a 4-3-3 to a 4-4-2. It was 4-4-2 that they played against Man City this season when they won by a goal to nil. I mean, bit of cover for the fullbacks in that scenario as well. Are they better in a 4-4-2 than a 4-3-3?
Well, it's worth trying, because at the moment it's not working, is it?
Yeah.
It's been sort of hoisted by his own sword, really, in many, many ways, because he loves the two fullbacks to get forward. And probably just at the moment is a little bit kind of, well, hold on, boys, because we're conceding goals on a regular basis. So, listen, he'll have thought long and hard about it. I don't think there's any doubt about that. But he very, very rarely changes the way that he plays, because he has this belief, obviously, in the way that he plays. And as we know, generally, it's been very, very successful. So I'm not sure I'm doing the game tonight, but I'm sat here thinking, I'm not quite sure exactly how he's going to set up his team to play. But I think he, at the very least at the moment, he's got to make them more difficult to play against, therefore more difficult to score against as well.
Is it a cycle, Mark? Because I was reading an interesting piece by Miguel Delaney in The Independent yesterday. He was talking about the famous, I think it was Bob Paisley originally said it, and Alex Ferguson adopted the quote as well, that, most great teams have a cycle of 3 or 4 years. If you look at it, this Liverpool team are in probably their 6th year of this cycle. So does he just have to nearly stop and rebuild the second team from here, or how do you think it'll work?
No, I think you're right. I think you're right, but I don't think it needs a massive rebuild. That's the thing. But it looks, as we spoke before, that this rebuild maybe not happen until the summer. And also, of course, in the background is what are the owners doing? Are they seriously looking for investment, but not over 50%? So they're still in control of the club, or are they just sort of sitting to themselves saying, you know what, let's just sell it and obviously go off and back to America and do whatever they want to do with the money? Generally, and they've been very, very successful as owners. They made the odd mistake, which owners haven't done, but they understand that, with having a sporting franchise, that you get a loss of form, you get injuries at key times, etc. So they're not exactly panicking. I think they've looked at the season, and it's one of those which is, look, let's get through to the summer and have a little look and see what we can or cannot do regards new personnel, etc.
I think chaos has been a word that has followed Darwin Nuñez around since he's joined. But I guess the absence and departure of Sadio Mane is being highlighted even more so now, Mark.
Yeah, well, it is, and you get that because Mane was great, and Mane was great without the ball. We know how good he was with the ball, but he was just one player. So I think Nuñez will come good. I really seriously do. But at the moment, obviously, that's an issue. And having most of your strike force injured as well is just purely unlucky. And it's not like they've been pulling up in training or anything like that. It's all been in games, but I'm pretty sure it is all related to what they've been through in terms of last season. I mean, Jordan Henderson, I don't know how much he covers in terms of the games, wherever he goes and plays, etc. But he's way off the pace at the moment, and he's really, really struggling. And you're looking around and saying, well, who can we replace him with? Well, do you know what? They haven't really got anybody to replace him with. We can't stick Cater in again. Well, we can, but he's just never, ever done it. You can see there's something there, but he's one of those that's failed. And when you look at Klopp signings, there are very, very few of those who have failed. And generally, when you actually seriously look at them over the last, 5 or 6 years, as you were talking about, he's made very good players into world class, which is, for a coach, is obviously, the best CV ever. So I think sometimes you look at it and think, it's just not, it's going to be one of those seasons. Whether it's one of those seasons and the next season is just as bad, I'm not sure, but obviously that's a long way off yet.
Speaking of things that might be a long way off, I was surprised to see some of the quotes from his press conference with the papers this morning, and he was talking about, the question came up about whether he might leave the club, and obviously he's very bullish about that, and unless I'm told to go, you said earlier on he's the best thing about the football club. It feels like we're a long way from that.
Oh, from him going? Yeah, no. I think, it's not so much, with Klopp it won't be losing games, it will just be kind of, waking up in bed and thinking, I've had enough, regardless. And I think that's just the way that he is. I mean, Liverpool did really, really well to attract him in the first place, because I think he was on, didn't he say he was having like a 1-year hiatus? And obviously his phone or his agent's phone would have been ringing all the time, etc. And he looked at Liverpool and kind of thought, you know what? There aren't many clubs that I would decide to change my mind for, but he did. But now he's the most important person at the football club. Absolutely. Without him, they wouldn't be anywhere near where they are or what they've done. So he is that important. You can feel it, you can see it with him that he's just thinking every time they play, going, what's going to happen today? And for a manager, that's the worst possible thing, because generally, with all his teams, he knows that they were going to win most of the games that they play in. But at the moment, he's looking and thinking, right, well, what's happening today? What else is going to go wrong against us? And, you don't feel sorry for yourself. It's just one of those things that happens. I mean, when I first signed in, God, it was 1981, at Boxing Day, we were beaten at home by Man City. We were beaten, I think, 3-1 at home against Man City. And we were 14th in the league. And this was a Liverpool team that had won the European Cup 6 months earlier in Paris, the 1-0, the Alan Kennedy goal. And all of a sudden, you can imagine all the local papers and TV and everybody saying, oh, they've gone, Liverpool have gone. That's it. It's the end of the cycle. Unfortunately, we had one or two young players come into the side and we ended up winning the league. We went 20-odd games unbeaten. So you just never, ever know, do you? That's the thing with football. But at the moment, they're way off the pace.
Just while we had you, Mark, I wanted to bring you this clip. So, of course, your good pal David Moyes and West Ham struggling at the moment, sitting in 18th in the Premier League standings and in a bit of relegation bother, but still plenty of time left. There's been a clip doing the rounds yesterday of David Moyes doing an interview with the Diary of a CEO with Stephen Bartlett. Some really, really interesting things have already come out of this in terms of the teaser. Just for anyone who hasn't heard it, have a listen.
They would be out screaming at you at half time, they'd be screaming at you at the end of the game.
What's the toll of that?
David the Messiah Moyes,
one of the best known football managers across the globe, building teams with a clear identity.
So where am I looking and who am I talking to? I was desperate to be successful as a manager, and I had 11 years at Everton where we were finding it really difficult to break into the top four. The phone rang, it was Sir Alex, and he said, I'm retiring and you're the next manager of Manchester United. No interview, not saying, would you like to be? And I met Edward on the next day, back to his house again, we met the Glazers. It was 3 days, and that was as simple as that. To get that offer from the greatest manager maybe there ever was a great compliment. But maybe if I'd really looked into it in more detail and more depth, there was a huge change going to have to take place. I trusted Manchester United.
Do you feel like that trust was let down?
Definitely. But my biggest regret was...
We start with the story that has dominated the front pages, the sacking of David Moyes.
How did you find out that you're losing your job?
Media.
Oh, really?
If you've got any class or any style, you have to give bad news well.
What are those steps forward to get West Ham competing at the very top of the table?
I want to build a new West Ham. A lot of supporters might not like the thought of that.
When you look at where West Ham is now, do you worry about losing your job?
I've got to say...
Yeah, fascinating stuff from the Diary of a CEO, Stephen Bartlett there, Mark. Like, even just the way in which he finds out he's getting the sack from United via social media. But for me, even just the fact that when he was getting the job at Old Trafford, just gets a call from Alex Ferguson, you're taking over from me, and he meets up with the hierarchy the following day. Some really interesting things, and I mean, fascinating stuff that we weren't quite aware of with David.
Yeah, well, as you know, I know him really well, so... and I went to quite a lot of the games at Man United when he got the job, which was quite interesting. Sat there in the director's box, obviously an ex-Liverpool player. He's driven, Moisey, absolutely, totally. He just lives for football. I mean, God help his missus Pam. I mean, she lives in Lytham up on the northwest, and you know, he's football, and obviously they're struggling at the moment, but. And I would say this, of course, but just let him manage, because it'll get them out of the mess that they're in. But his whole life is football. absolutely, totally football. And it's just one of those guys. I mean, I thought he did a fab job at Everton when you look at the players that he brought in and they sold on, etc. So he'll be fine. He'll be fine. I never worry about him. I spoke to him the other week. I can't remember. They'd just been beaten again somewhere, and he was apoplectic, but he's not got too much to worry about, has he?
Yeah, that's true. Hopefully the results from his perspective start to look up. And
yeah, well, in fairness to him, he is one of the good guys that people who know him will tell you he just is one of the good guys, but he is absolutely football mad.
Loves it. Mark, very finally, score prediction for Liverpool Wolves tonight in the Cup?
They're going to go through on pens.
Oh.
Who? Wolves?
No, but I think Liverpool, excuse me, I've got this hacking cough. I think Liverpool will go through on pens because basically I don't think they're that bothered about still being in the competition because really they need to be Champions League, aren't they? So you know what will happen. They'll end up going on and winning it.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, winning it tonight rather than winning
not the overall. Fair enough. Mark, great stuff as always. Thanks a million for joining us.
Pleasure.
Lovely stuff. 18 minutes past 8 on this Tuesday morning OTB AM. That was Mark Lawrenson, the former Liverpool and Republic of Ireland international.